Have you ever kept a secret so long, you started to wonder if it really happened? My name is Marlene Ayres, and for 30 years, I was the quiet one, the peacemaker, the steady hand. But all it took was one voicemail I didn't mean to save, and everything began to unravel. What would you do if the truth you feared most became the only thing that could set you free? Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. It was a Wednesday morning in mid-October, just cold enough that the window pane above my kitchen sink had started to fog. I stood there, holding a chipped mug of weak coffee, watching the last leaves fall from the sugar maple in the backyard. The silence in the house had a weight to it, dense, like the kind of quiet that only settles after a long storm, or right before another begins. I had already showered, printed the documents, double-checked the folder. The appointment with my attorney wasn't for another 3 hours, but I was dressed, hair brushed, waiting like someone about to walk into a job interview they never wanted. I stared at the printer tray, the pages lying there like thin little verdicts. Legal language that made it sound so clean, so rational. Petitioner seeks equitable distribution of jointly owned property. Equitable. That word had started to taste bitter in my mouth. I went back to the table and sat down, pulled the manila folder toward me. At the very top was a printed letter from Russell's attorney, clean font, no emotion. It said he was seeking sole ownership of the house on Lansing Street. Our house. The one I'd scrubbed floors in, hosted Thanksgiving in, repaired gutters on when he couldn't get around to it. The letter claimed I had made limited financial contributions to the mortgage. My name was on every payment stub, but of course, he'd made most of the money. That's always been his claim to ownership, what he paid, not what I gave up to stay. I heard his voice in my head, plain as day, "You're always making a big deal out of nothing. You overthink everything. You're just too sensitive, Marlene." Even now, months after I'd left, it still happened, his voice would arrive before my own thoughts had time to land. And I'd flinch, internally, like the echo had power over me. Old habits die hard. Especially the ones shaped to survive someone else's comfort. I reached for my phone. I wasn't going to check the news or scroll anything. I just needed to listen to something. Anything other than that voice in my head. That's when I remembered the voicemail folder, one I'd accidentally created months back while trying to save an audio file. I opened it without much thought, expecting junk, some spam calls or reminders from the dentist. Instead, I saw 12 audio files, each untitled, but dated. The first one was from Christmas Eve, 2020. Another from June 2021. All spaced out, irregular. It didn't make sense at first, how they got there. Then I remembered how sometimes, in the middle of a fight, I'd accidentally hit the voice memo button on my phone. I never meant to keep them. But I hadn't deleted them either. I clicked on one, late September of last year. Static. Then Russell's voice. "You think you're the victim in this house? You're not. You just sulk. You shut down. I can't live like this, Marlene. No man could." My own voice was barely audible, shaking. "I'm trying to tell you what I need. And what you need is to grow up." I froze. There was a strange kind of relief in hearing it played back, like confirmation that it wasn't just a bad memory, but something real. Something recorded. I wasn't exaggerating, or overreacting. It happened, and now it lived outside my head. That night, I listened to 4 more. I didn't know why I kept going. Maybe I was hoping one of them would include an apology, a soft spot. But they didn't. Just the same voice, in different seasons, cutting me down in new ways. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about how many times I'd walked away from a conversation feeling like I was broken for having feelings. I kept thinking about how often I tried to make things easier, for him, for the kids, for everyone. Everyone but me. And the crazy part? I wasn't even sure I wanted to use the recordings. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to humiliate him in court. That's not why I saved them. Hell, I didn't even know I had them. But now they were here. And maybe, just maybe, they were a part of something I hadn't let myself fully want yet. Freedom. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen of my phone. The list of recordings stared back like unopened letters. I didn't press play again. Not yet. But I knew something had shifted. I didn't plan to record that conversation. In fact, I hadn't meant to keep any of the 12 old voicemails at all, until I heard the one from that night. I didn't plan on spending that entire Thursday morning listening to my past, but once I started, I couldn't stop. The files sat there like unopened boxes in a dusty attic, each one labeled only with a date. I didn't remember recording most of them, and the ones I did remember, well, I'd tried not to. The second file I played was dated December 24th, 2020. Christmas Eve. I remembered that night in fragments, pine needles on the rug, the smell of overcooked ham, a chill in the hallway that the furnace couldn't quite beat. We'd exchanged gifts early that year because Russell wanted to be ahead of the mess. I had spent hours picking out his present. A navy silk tie with tiny silver anchors. He liked nautical stuff, or at least he used to. I had it wrapped in red foil paper and tucked it under his napkin at dinner. When he opened it, he blinked once, then twice, then said flatly, "It's not burgundy." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "No, but navy goes better with your gray jacket." He looked up at me like I'd insulted his intelligence. Then he pushed the box aside. I said burgundy. "That's what I asked for." "You never listen." The recording picked up the sharpness in his tone. You could hear the clatter of silverware as he stood. My voice, small and strained, asked him not to make a scene. And then his response, clear, cold. "You know why people don't want to be around you, Marlene? Because you overreact to everything. Always have. It's exhausting." I remembered crying quietly in the kitchen after that. But what I didn't remember, what the recording captured, was how quickly he pivoted from anger to silence, as if my hurt had annoyed him more than his own behavior. I'd told myself that night that he was stressed, that I'd chosen the wrong gift, that I should be more careful next time. But hearing it now, I didn't feel guilty. I felt stunned. Not by the words, but by how familiar they still sounded. I went on to the next one, dated April 2021. It was shorter. In this one, Russell had come home after a small get-together I'd hosted for 2 old friends from my book club. I'd made a light lunch, brewed some mint tea, even picked up shortbread cookies. It had felt like a win, an afternoon that was mine. But as soon as the door shut behind them, his voice filled the air. "You sounded ridiculous," he said. "That stuffy little voice you use when you want people to think you're classy, it's embarrassing. You're not on NPR, Marlene." My voice, on the recording, didn't respond right away. There was a pause, and then a barely audible "I was just being polite." He laughed. "No, you were being fake. That's your problem, you don't know who you are anymore." I paused the recording. I sat there, holding the phone like it was something fragile. A part of me wanted to scream, at him, at myself, at the years I spent trying to make myself smaller, more agreeable, easier to be around. But the louder part was quiet. It was the part of me that had gone along with it all, for so long, that hearing it out loud didn't feel shocking. It felt like confirmation of something I'd always known but never dared name. That was the worst of it, really. I had absorbed his words over time, like cigarette smoke into fabric. Slowly. Until I couldn't tell where his opinion ended and mine began. I sat back and stared out the window. The maple tree was almost bare now. I remembered once loving the sound of its leaves in the wind. I couldn't remember the last time I'd noticed them before this week. When my phone buzzed, I didn't expect to see her name. Diane Lofton. We used to work together at Trentford Systems, back before I quit full-time to raise the kids. Diane and I had been close, lunches, carpooling to conferences, the kind of laughter that comes easy and often. But when I married Russell, I'd slowly pulled away. Not all at once. Just canceled a few plans, let her texts go unanswered, told myself it was just life getting busy. Her message was short. Hey stranger. Heard your name come up at a legal lunch today. Just wanted to check in. Want to grab a coffee soon? My treat. No pressure. D. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Then I typed. Would love that. Maple Iron still open? Tomorrow morning? She replied with a heart and a simple, still my favorite table in the back. I set my phone down. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. More like the way you shake when something long frozen finally starts to thaw. Maple Iron still looked the same, tucked into the corner of that narrow block between the pharmacy and the bookstore that never seemed to be open. The bell over the door jingled with the same soft chime, and the smell, dark roast coffee with a hint of cinnamon, was exactly as I remembered. Diane was already there, tucked into our old table near the back window, her cardigan draped over the seat beside her like she was saving a place. She stood when she saw me. We hugged awkwardly, like people who used to know each other better than anyone else, and now weren't quite sure where to place their arms. But her warmth was real. Familiar. You look the same, she said, sitting down. Tired maybe, but same. I laughed. Tired is accurate. She waited a beat, watching me. Then she said, So, are you really okay? There wasn't a hint of judgment in her voice, just concern. And somehow that made it harder to lie. I'm not sure, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug the barista had just set down. I'm not falling apart, but I'm not sure I'd call this okay either. Diane nodded slowly. I heard about the divorce. From someone who works with the court. I wasn't sure if it was even true. It's true. She gave me a small smile. I wasn't asking for details, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious. I paused. For years, I'd kept everything behind a polished wall. I was the woman who smiled at church potlucks, sent thank you notes on time, hosted birthdays with themed napkins and matching cupcakes. I didn't talk about fights, or pain, or what it felt like to tiptoe around someone in your own home. But something in me shifted that morning. Maybe it was Diane's face, calm, open, or maybe I was just too tired to keep holding it all in. It wasn't dramatic, I said quietly. Not at first. It was little things. Small corrections. Jokes that weren't funny. Conversations that left me feeling like I'd forgotten who I was. Diane didn't blink. How long? I exhaled. Longer than I care to admit. I used to think it was just me. That I was the one making things hard. She looked down at her coffee. That's what my mom said. Right up until she left my dad at 62. I glanced up. Really? She stayed because he never hit her. That was the bar, you know? If he didn't put a hand on her, it wasn't abuse. But his words, they bruised her all the same. That landed hard. I let it sit in the space between us, heavy and true. No one ever tells you how invisible emotional pain can be. Or how long it takes to admit it's real, she added. I nodded. Russell had this way of making me feel like I was always on the verge of messing up. Like I had to rehearse everything before I spoke, or he'd find the wrong in it. Diane leaned back in her chair. That's not love, Marlene. I looked out the window. The streets were wet from a morning drizzle, but the sky was clearing. I could see my reflection in the glass, older, thinner, worn, but my eyes, they looked different. Like maybe I was starting to see myself again. We talked a while longer. Nothing too deep after that, just work stuff, her nieces, a funny story about a coworker. But when we stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "You're not crazy," she said. "And you're not alone." It took everything in me not to cry. Back home, I set my purse down on the entryway table and kicked off my shoes. The house was quiet, but too quiet. A charged kind of silence. I didn't have to wait long. Russell was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like he'd been waiting all morning. He didn't look angry, not exactly. Just tight. Cold. "You met with Diane," he said, voice flat. I didn't answer right away. I just moved past him to hang up my coat. "You told her things," he continued. "Talked about me." I turned around. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. His eyes narrowed. "You really think dragging people into this is going to make you look better in court?" "I can say a lot more than you think." I felt the shake start in my hands, but I didn't let it reach my voice. "Say whatever you want," I said. "I'm done tiptoeing." He blinked. Just once. As if surprised. Maybe I was surprised too. And I didn't say anything else. I just walked upstairs, one slow step at a time, like I was climbing out of something that had been holding me down for far too long. I don't remember what I was looking for that afternoon. I'd gone upstairs to sort the hall closet, something about replacing old blankets or tossing expired batteries. But I ended up back at my phone again, sitting cross-legged on the bedroom floor with the same folder of forgotten voice recordings pulled open. The one from March 17, 2022 caught my eye, not because of the date, but because of the little note I'd accidentally typed under it, Charlotte's birthday. It took me a second to place it. That was the year she turned 23. I had bought a bus ticket to spend the weekend with her at college. Just the two of us, no plans, just coffee shops and long walks like we used to do when she was younger. I'd even made a small scrapbook for her, filled with old photos and notes from her childhood. She cried when I told her I was coming. And then I canceled. I told her something vague, Russell had a cold, or the pipes had backed up, or work had piled up. I don't remember the lie I settled on. But I remember the truth. I played the recording. I hadn't realized the mic had picked up so much. There was a soft thud, maybe me setting my bag down by the front door. And then Russell's voice, sharp and full of disdain. "You really think it's okay to just leave me here like some damn stray dog while you go play Supermom?" I could hear myself say, "It's her birthday. She asked me months ago." There was a pause, then this, his tone flat, but laced with something heavier. "I don't give a damn if it's her birthday. You're not walking out that door. You leave, don't bother coming back." I sucked in a breath, sitting on the floor of my room, listening to my past self go quiet. I hadn't fought back. I hadn't even said goodbye. Then came the line that pulled something loose in my chest. "I'm not gonna sit here like a damn idiot while you run off and pretend you're some kind of saint. You want to be loved so badly, Marlene, it's pathetic." I paused the recording. My hands were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the force of something that had been buried and now refused to stay silent. I'd told myself for years that I was overreacting. That I just misunderstood his tone. That maybe I was too sensitive. But this wasn't me misreading anything. This was a man telling his wife to choose between him and her own daughter's birthday. And I'd chosen him. Or more accurately, I'd chosen the version of myself I thought was still safe, quiet, careful, responsible. The one who didn't rock the boat. I sat there crying, not hard, not loudly. Just tears slipping out quietly, like my body had waited too long to release them. Not out of sadness, but out of recognition. I hadn't made it up. I wasn't imagining it. It happened. I texted Diane. I didn't say much. Just, need to talk. You around? She called me instead. I didn't even say hello. I just told her I had recordings. And that I didn't know what to do. She listened, didn't rush in with advice. Then she said gently, "You might want to share them with your lawyer." "I don't know," I whispered. "What if the kids hear them? What if people look at me like I've been weak all these years?" "You haven't been weak," she said. "You've been surviving." I stared at the laptop on my bed. Open email. Drafted message. Blank subject line. She added, "And Marlene, if the truth makes someone uncomfortable, maybe they were too comfortable with the lie." We hung up. I sat still for a long while. Then I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Legal, Personal. I dragged 3 files into a new email. I didn't name them. I didn't explain. I just typed. "These may help." I hovered over the send button. My finger didn't move. I stared at it, heart pounding, 1,000 thoughts flying through me. What would Russell say? Would he retaliate? Would the kids understand? Would I regret it? Then I whispered to the empty room, "You already gave him everything. What's left to lose?" And I pressed send. That little whoosh sound, so quiet, somehow felt louder than anything Russell had ever yelled at me. I didn't sleep much after I sent the email. 3 nights in a row, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it hummed and spun and whispered all the doubts I'd tried so hard to push away. What kind of mother airs out her marriage in court? What kind of wife collects evidence against her own husband? Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Charlotte or Eliza hearing those recordings, my voice too quiet, his voice too loud. I pictured the look on their faces, the shift in how they'd see me. Would they think I was being spiteful? Disloyal? Would they ask why I stayed so long if things were that bad? For years, I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was a kind of love. That silence was noble. That protecting the image of our family somehow mattered more than protecting myself. But now, with those recordings in someone else's hands, hands that could do something with them, the silence felt like a weight I was finally learning how to set down. My lawyer, Candace, replied the next morning. "These are significant. We'll submit them in our next hearing. Thank you for your trust." That word, trust, hit me in a strange place. I wasn't used to people thanking me for speaking up. I wasn't even sure I deserved it. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. I recognized the number before it even lit up with his name. Russell. For a second, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But old habits still kicked in, and I answered. His voice came through sharp, all teeth and ice. "So this is what we're doing now?" I didn't respond. "You're trying to drag my name through the mud. For what, Marlene? To feel powerful? To make a point?" I kept breathing. "You realize how pathetic this looks, right? You don't win sympathy by acting like a victim. You just look small." Still, I said nothing. Then his tone shifted, slightly quieter, but laced with venom. "Is this your way of punishing me for not worshipping you the way you always needed?" And with that, I hung up. Just like that. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer a clever comeback. I didn't explain myself. I ended the call, placed the phone face down on the kitchen table, and exhaled. Deep, steady. It was the first time in decades that I'd cut him off mid-sentence, and didn't feel the usual flush of guilt afterward. No voice in my head telling me to fix it. No urge to smooth it over. Just silence. And in that silence, peace. I stood by the sink for a long time, letting the stillness settle around me like a soft blanket. The wind picked up outside, brushing dry leaves across the patio. For once, the quiet didn't feel like tension. It felt like choice. The next call came a few hours later. Eliza. Her name lit up my screen, and my stomach tightened. I answered with a cautious, "Hey, sweetheart." There was a pause on the other end. Not the kind filled with static, but the kind filled with weight. "Mom," she said slowly, "is it true? Did you record him?" I closed my eyes. I didn't do it on purpose, not at first. But over the years, I saved a few things. I didn't plan to share them until recently. Another pause. Then she asked, "Why now?" It was a simple question, but loaded. "Because I finally realized," I said, voice trembling, "that telling the truth isn't betrayal. It's survival." I braced myself for disappointment, for confusion, for a dozen questions I wasn't ready to answer. But what I heard instead was something I hadn't expected. "I read part of what your lawyer submitted," she said. "Dad called me right after. Tried to explain himself. But I didn't believe him." My throat tightened. "Eliza, I never wanted to drag you or Charlotte into this." "I know. That's kind of the problem, isn't it?" Her voice cracked just a little. "You spent so long trying not to hurt us, you let him keep hurting you." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, one hand on the back of the dining chair like it might steady the world. "You know," she said, softer now, "I used to think you were weak. That you stayed because you were scared. But now, I think maybe you were just trying to hold everything together. And now you're finally letting it fall apart. And that takes guts." My eyes filled fast. "Eliza, I'm proud of you, Mom." That did it. A tear fell onto the tabletop, and I didn't wipe it away. I let it sit there, a quiet mark of something cracking open inside me. I whispered, "Thank you." She said she'd call again soon, and we hung up. I sat there for a long while, phone still in hand, heart still thudding. Somehow, being called brave by my daughter, after everything, felt more healing than anything a court could ever rule. Franklin County Family Court isn't the kind of place you forget. The benches are too cold, the air too dry, and the lighting, somehow both fluorescent and dim, makes everything feel a little harsher than it already is. That morning, I sat at the long wooden table across from Russell for the first time since I moved out. I didn't look at him. Not once. But I could feel the heat of his gaze on me like a lamp turned too high. My lawyer, Candace, placed the manila folder between us. Inside were transcripts and timestamps, USB drives, carefully labeled audio files. She leaned in, whispered, "Just breathe. We're not here to prove he's a monster. We're here to show a pattern." The judge, a man in his early 60s with a steady voice and a face like carved stone, flipped through the papers in front of him. Then he nodded once and said, "Let's hear the first recording." Candace pressed play. At first, all I could hear was the distant hum of a kitchen appliance and my own voice, hesitant. Then Russell came in, clear, cold, unmistakable. "I'm not here to manage your feelings, Marlene. You're not a child. Either pull yourself together or go cry somewhere else." In the courtroom, the air shifted. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, arms folded. "Next clip," he said. The next one was from the night I canceled my trip to visit Charlotte. Russell's voice, "I don't care what day it is. You walk out that door, don't bother coming back. I won't be your plan B while you play perfect mom." You could hear me saying, "She's our daughter." Then his voice again, sharper this time. "You think I give a damn about birthdays? This house comes first. I come first. The courtroom was still. So still, I could hear Diane breathing behind me, slow, deliberate. She had come without telling me, just appeared in the back row like a quiet anchor. Her eyes met mine when I glanced over my shoulder. She gave me the smallest nod. Russell's lawyer tried to object, called the recordings out of context and private marital conversations. The judge looked unimpressed. "She's not recording pillow talk," he said. "She's recording verbal intimidation." Russell shifted in his seat, then finally spoke for himself. "I said those things in moments of frustration. We were going through a lot. Every marriage has arguments." He turned to the judge with a rehearsed shrug. "Besides, they were private. I didn't know I was being recorded." Candace stood. Her voice was steady. "Your Honor, my client did not record these to entrap her husband. In most cases, she didn't even know she was capturing the audio. But what matters here is not intent, it's content. No one forced the respondent to speak to her this way. And these clips, unfortunately, reflect a consistent dynamic: emotional coercion, degradation, and isolation." Russell scoffed, loud enough for the judge to raise his brow. He tried to whisper something to his attorney, but the judge lifted his hand. "I've heard enough for today," he said. "We'll continue discovery in the coming weeks." Then, after a pause, he looked down at the papers again. "But let me be clear, based on what I've heard, the court acknowledges substantial evidence of a pattern of emotional manipulation by the respondent." He looked up, his eyes moving from Russell to me. "And the petitioner's decision to leave this marriage appears justified by more than just irreconcilable differences." I didn't cry. Not there. But I felt something release in my chest, like a lock that had been rusted shut finally giving way. The judge adjourned the hearing, and people began to shuffle out. I sat still for a moment longer, watching the room clear, watching Russell whisper harshly to his lawyer and then walk out without looking back. Diane came down the aisle and stood beside me. She didn't say anything at first. Just placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "You okay?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm getting there." We stepped outside together. The sun was low in the sky, gold spilling across the courthouse steps. My hands were trembling a little, still catching up to everything. But my feet felt firm on the ground. I didn't know what the final outcome would be. I didn't know how much more fighting there'd be or how the story would twist next. But I knew this much. I hadn't imagined it. And that truth, spoken aloud in front of strangers, felt like the beginning of something I never thought I'd have again. My own voice. It was a Thursday when the letter came. Not to me, Russell had sent it straight to Eliza and Charlotte, through email, with the subject line, "For your clarity." Eliza forwarded it to me with a screenshot and no commentary, just a simple message. "Don't let this get to you. We know what he's doing." I opened it with shaking hands, even though I already knew what kind of poison I was about to read. In it, Russell painted himself as the misunderstood, patient husband, the one who stayed committed even when your mother stopped trying. He called me vindictive, said the recordings were manipulated, claimed that I was influenced by people who wanted to see our family destroyed. His final line made my stomach turn. "I hope one day you both realize who really kept this family together, and who decided to tear it apart." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't hit reply. Instead, I got up, walked to my desk, and pulled out a notepad. I grabbed the pen I kept for thank you cards and started writing, not to him, not to the girls. Just for me. "You never kept us together," I wrote. "You kept us quiet. There's a difference." The letter flowed out without much thought. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Out of years of silence finally making way for honesty. I told him I wasn't trying to ruin anything, I was trying to survive something. I told him I wasn't his enemy. I just stopped being his shield. I folded the paper in half, tucked it into a drawer, and never mailed it. I don't need to win this in public, I whispered to the quiet room. I just need to stop carrying him inside me. A week later, he showed up at Diane's house. She'd invited me over for tea, nothing unusual. I was helping her set out plates of lemon cookies when we heard the knock. I knew that rhythm. Russell never rang doorbells, he knocked like the door owed him something. Diane opened it. She didn't look surprised. "I'll be in the garden," she said to me, quietly. "You okay?" I nodded. Russell stepped inside like he still belonged in every room he entered. We ended up sitting on the back patio, under the creaky old pergola we'd helped Diane stain 2 summers ago. The same space where, for years, we'd had cookouts and shared stories. Back then, I always played the doting wife, handing him paper towels and drinks with a tight smile. He sat across from me now, legs crossed, arms resting on the patio chair like he had all the time in the world. "I didn't come to fight," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "That's a first." He smirked. "I came to offer a way out of this. You withdraw the tapes. Say they were taken out of context. We settle. Quietly. No damage to reputations. No drama." I stared at him. "And in return? You keep the house. I won't contest it. But you stop making me out to be something I'm not." I let the silence sit between us. The wind moved through the leaves above, brushing through like it was trying to carry something away. "I didn't do this to win," I said finally. "I did it to breathe again." He scoffed. "You've always been dramatic, Marlene." I met his eyes. "No. I've just always been quiet. And now you're not used to hearing me speak." He leaned forward, voice lower now. "You're not going to come out of this looking like some hero, you know. You're not the victim you're pretending to be." I tilted my head. "I'm not pretending anything. I lived it." He shook his head, as if I were a child who didn't understand something basic. "You don't win, Marlene. You never do. You're not built for it." I stood slowly, calmly. My hands didn't shake this time. "Maybe not," I said. But I beat the one voice that told me I couldn't. He didn't have a reply. Not a real one. Just a shrug, the way people do when they've lost control of the story. I walked away. Across the patio, through the kitchen, past Diane quietly sipping her tea by the window. It took 2 months after the final court hearing to finalize the paperwork. Russell had dragged out the process, of course, trying to reframe everything, threatening appeals, offering settlements that were just silence dressed up as compromise. But in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I kept half the house. Not just on paper, but with the right to decide what happened next. He'd once looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll never get a dime from me, let alone the house." Now here I was, standing on the porch of that very house, keys in hand, watching the sunset behind the roof I no longer feared. I didn't stay. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. I sold it 3 weeks later, quietly, without fanfare. I didn't box up every dish or save every photo, I kept what mattered and left the rest. It was the first time in my life I'd ever walked away from something without the weight of guilt slung over my shoulder like a duffel bag. I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of Columbus. Nothing fancy. A little dated. But it had a good heater and a balcony just big enough for a chair and a fern. There was a library 4 blocks away, a yoga studio that offered gentle flow for women over 50, and a cafe with the best blueberry scones I'd ever had. I started volunteering at a women's community center twice a week. Nothing complicated, just helping other women fill out forms, find counselors, understand court procedures. Most of them were older. Most of them were scared. I knew that look. I'd worn it for years. And when they sat across from me, voice trembling, telling me how he doesn't hit me, but I never interrupted. I just listened. Sometimes, that's all someone needs. To say it out loud and not be told they're crazy. Russell, as far as I know, still lives in the same house. But something's shifted. The neighborhood no longer waves quite as readily when he passes. The invitations to speak at charity events stopped. Word has a way of moving through communities, even without headlines. And when it comes to men like him, it's not the courts that break the spell. It's the quiet, collective realization that the version he sold of himself wasn't the full story. He wasn't charged with anything. He still wears a tie and smiles at the bank teller. But he's not untouchable anymore. I don't wish him misery. I don't wish him anything, really. Indifference, I've learned, is its own kind of freedom. Every now and then, I'll remember a good moment. A summer barbecue, a road trip to Asheville, that one night we danced in the kitchen after too much wine. Those memories don't sting anymore. They don't twist into some tangled mess of what could have been. They're just snapshots. And they live in the same place now as the bad ones, the past. I found my old journal a few weeks ago. The one I used to write in late at night, trying to make sense of myself through loops of guilt and justifications. I flipped through the pages, wondering how I could have ever believed the things I once wrote. Now, I write in a new one. Not every night. Just enough to keep track of the life I'm actually living, not surviving. I write down the name of a book I liked, or the way my neighbor's dog looks like it's always smiling. I write down the first time I laughed so hard I cried again. It happened while watching an old woman trip on her shoelace and then dramatically pretend it was a dance move. We both laughed until we wheezed. This morning, I came back to Maple Iron. I brought my notebook and ordered the same black coffee I used to, though now, I add a little honey. My table by the window was open. It's October again. The leaves are bright and brittle. The light hits differently this year. I opened my notebook and wrote a letter. Not to Russell. Not to the girls. To myself. You made it out. You spoke up when it would have been easier to shut down. You didn't fix what was broken, but you stopped calling it your fault. You're not bitter. You're not afraid. You are, finally, exactly who you were always meant to be, unhidden. I signed it with a smiley face. Not because I'm trying to be cute. Just because I can. I folded the page, slipped it between two others, and sat back in my chair. There's something about autumn air that feels like truth. Like you can't lie to yourself anymore once the wind starts shaking the trees. I used to be afraid I'd grow old in silence. That my life would end in a whisper nobody heard. But it turns out, at the very end of everything I thought I'd lost, I found my voice. You know, looking back now, in my 70s, I don't think of it as a story about leaving a marriage. It's more about returning to myself, slowly, quietly, like a woman coming home after a long walk in the cold. Not everything healed overnight. Some things never do. But I stopped waiting for closure from someone who was never willing to offer it. And instead, I made space for peace. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe in your own way, you're still finding your voice. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred anything at all, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. There's more to say. And I'd love to share it with you.